Radio.
I want to cut through the myth here, and I want to speak a positive message to the majority of people who are listening here and thinking, I just don't have the time to train daily or twice a day every day or whatever all these top climbers do. And I'm saying to you, that's a positive.
Hey y'all, welcome back to the Struggle Climbing Show. Man, am I psyched that you're here today for an incredibly psyched conversation with Coach Neil Gresham, or Gresh, as he's lovingly referred to by many who know him and have worked with him and climbed with him. And man, is Neil just a friggin' legend. He's been at it for decades, like 3 decades. He's coached over 3,000 climbers, and as a climber himself, he's super strong, really, really inspiringly strong in his recent years. In fact, in his 40s and 50s is when he climbed some of his hardest routes ever, including Lexicon, a super scary and incredibly hard E11, and then a couple 8Cs, an 8C plus in his 50s. 40s and 50s are like his time, and that's really great. It's really inspiring to know that you can be climbing for so long and still finding ways to level up as a climber. And one of the ways that he helps other climbers to level up is that he is a coach, and he is definitely amongst the earliest crop of modern climbing coaches, those that came up around the 90s that are still coaching today. Not very many of them. Eric Hurst here, a friend of the show and of mine and a coach of mine, and Neil Gresham came up around the same time writing articles and then offering coaching. And Neil is still coaching now, 3 decades later. Over 3,000 strong, crushing climbers out there have worked with Neil. And so this conversation kind of slices it right down the middle. We look at Neil's climbing, and we look at how he helps others to climb their best. And that's elite climbers, like our friend Tim Emmett, who sent his mega proj, Aravea, as you all know, he was on the show recently, and credited Neil as his coach and good friend to help him reach that milestone in his climbing career. But then also just everyday busy people like Dusty Miller, who was a weekend warrior on this show, and so many others. Neil is very thoughtful. He's like the anti-AI coach. He really puts a ton of thought and personalization into every plan he writes for climbers. And then we explore all of that in this conversation here. So I'm really excited. And then on the backside, I'll tell you a little bit more about what I've got going on. Ever since I sent the big proji recently, the Boulder Project, I've been putting a lot of thought into what my training is going to look like coming up and what my summer and fall goals are going to be. So I'll tease those out at the end here, but let's not waste any time because this is a supersized, very nutrient-dense conversation here. I loved every second of it. So let's pull on right now with Neil Gresham. How are you, man? It's really a pleasure to meet you.
Hey, nice to meet you too. Yeah, I mean, I think certainly after hearing your conversation with Dusty, I was going to get in touch and you just beat me to it.
Cool. Well, yeah, it's funny because I feel like I know you, and I'm sure, professionals probably get this all the time. And I certainly get this now that I've been doing this show for quite some time is I'll meet people for the first time and they'll just start asking me about things from my life that typically people wouldn't normally know. And like, I feel like after having now a couple conversations with Tim and then with Dusty, and then of course, just following your climbing for decades now, I feel like I know you, but we're just meeting for the first time.
Exactly. Well, I think that's a really good starting point. And, likewise, I haven't listened to all the episodes, but I've got a pretty good feel about what you do and the sort of stuff that, I know you move around climbing pretty broadly in the show, but there is a bit of a focus for kind of what we call in the UK weekend warriors, and like psych high but time low people, and that's for sure been a big part of my coaching over the years. So I think there's going to be a good fit. I'm sure we're going to find lots to talk about.
Oh man, I feel like I could get the tattoo on my forehead that says "Psych high, time low." Man, you just nailed it. That could be the name of this podcast. It's "Psych high, time low." Dude, I'm so excited, and I'm trying to wrap my head around how we're going to do this, Neil, because I do want it to be a 6-hour podcast, but I don't think that'll float for any of our schedules. But because you're such an accomplished climber and you're such an accomplished and experienced coach, I'm kind of rethinking the format here. And originally I was going to just structure this as a coach interview. From time to time, I connect with with coaches from around the world, and everybody from Hazel Finlay to Louis Parkinson to Nate Drolet and Eric Hurst, and now you, but also you've just got this legendary climbing history as well. And so I think what I'm going to do is maybe structure this as a typical struggle podcast where we'll touch on the usual pillars of the struggle, which is training, nutrition, tactics, mental game, and then kind of beyond. But then in each of those chapters, I'll try to split the lens, if you will, the belay glasses of each of those chapters, and you can opine about your own personal experience in that chapter for training, for example. You can talk about you as Neil Gresham climber, but then we can talk about you as a coach and how you work with clients on their training. So basically a two-pronged chapter each way through. And then inevitably the wheels come off the bus and we just let it wander wherever it wants to go. And that's fine too.
Sure. I like the idea of that as a way of approaching it.
I got a lot of questions from listeners that were sent in as well. And so I want to make sure that we can get to some of those, but I think we could just dive in.
Let's just dive in. Let's go.
Right on. Well, we'll start where we always start with, which is struggle, Neil. And you've got a good long lens, man. You've got some decades now to be able to look back. And so when I ask you what your relationship is with struggle as a climber, what that means to you, what comes to mind?
I don't feel like I ever took to climbing naturally. Like my first experiences of climbing, I got completely beaten up. My dad took me out to some sandstone outcrops. I'm from London, which is like kind of not an outdoor climbing area in the UK at all, but there's some little sandstone outcrops in the south. And I went and I could barely pull on. And it's just top roping here. This is kind of before bouldering was really defined, but this rock was sort of too soft to place trad gear. So you're top roping these routes. Some of them I couldn't get off the ground. Some of them I got halfway up and had these epic sieges, like elbows up, falling off. And my dad sort of, like as we were driving away, my dad said, well, I presume, we won't be doing that again. And my pupils were dilated. I was like, oh, Dad, no. Like I've had the best time in my life. When can we go again? When can we go again? And, the second session was not much better. I don't think I got up anything. What I'm saying is I struggled from the minute I put climbing shoes on. And I don't think that ever changed. Over the years, of course, I've seen like super young, talented climbers come through and shoot past me. And it just seems so effortless for them. I don't think it is. I know, all these guys push their limits in their own way, right? But I know there's a lot of people listening to this show who will think, I'm not one of these like genetically superior specimens who was like, came out of the womb and was designed to climb. I feel like I'm like working against a few obstacles here. I mean, in my case, I'm a fairly heavy set guy. I'm pulling a lot of poundage up the wall, and I feel like I'm struggling against that. I'm seeing, climbers come through who have just got this like light wiry build and they just skip up the wall, and I think, wouldn't that be nice? And right. So there's struggling in that sense. I just think also because I've totally by choice been an all-round climber. I mean, I love ice climbing as much as I love deep water soloing, as much as I love trad, as much as I love sport. And what I find is that my approach is I'm constantly switching around these disciplines. And when I move from, say, ice climbing back into bouldering, for example, it's a pretty tough experience. Like you've been ice climbing, you've been carrying a pack up a hill, your legs have all got pumped up, you've been eating like, burgers in the evening and all this to kind of fuel your big days out. You go back to bouldering and your fingers feel weak and, your movement feels pretty clunky. Whereas if you're someone who just boulders all the time and only does that, then you're constantly in tune with your activity and things are flowing and things are working with you. Whereas I often get this feeling that I'm swimming against the tide because I'm constantly like chopping disciplines around,
right.
Like equally, you do a bunch of sport climbing and suddenly you find yourself on trad and it's like, okay, right. The gear's not as good now. Maybe I can't fall. And you're having to change your mindset, change your approach to training, change your tactics, change everything. But I, this is not a grumble. I love this, but you could possibly define it as a struggle if you wanted to. I don't know how much time you've got here. I interpret struggle like other ways as well.
I'd love to hear it, because the reason I named the show The Struggle, it kind of in the first place, is that at the time of starting this show, I don't think I had even broken into 512. Maybe I had just first climbed my first 12A, which is a 7A plus, I think, right? And so, and I've steadily progressed over the years here, not in leaps and bounds. But what I found so fascinating was that as I was having conversations with Adam Ondra or Will Bosey or Nina Williams or Lynn Hill, we could relate because I was maybe struggling to try to get up my first 7B and they were struggling to climb 9A or, whatever the case may be. But it was very relatable because we were psyched and we were just wanting to get better and we were trying to find ways to do it. And we were struggling. It was just like, I was like, I can't believe I'm relating to Adam Ondra right now. And so, yes, I would love for you to continue to explore this for a minute before we get granular on, all these other chapters.
Okay. Well, let's really, take the dive with this and say that the real struggle is the bit that the coaches don't really talk about. No one really talks about because there isn't like a portal for this. And that's the external stuff, like what's going on in the background. And this has been the stuff that has either made my climbing or destroyed it over the years. I mean, let's just take a further step back and say, hey, a lot of us who are privileged enough to be able to go climbing, go traveling, have these incredible experiences, we don't really know the meaning of the term struggle, right? Sure. I think we would all admit that we're very fortunate people to have climbing in our lives and the capacity to go climbing. However, everybody has their story to tell. No one skips through life without setbacks. And when I look back, undoubtedly, like overcoming like bereavement in my life, there was a series of events. I lost a best friend when I was at school. I lost a girlfriend just after I left university, and the effect that this had on my climbing was just dramatic. This sort of the cycle of this, emotional trauma. I mean, in particular, after losing my girlfriend, I suddenly found that I got chronic elbow tendonitis, and it wasn't necessarily attributable to the way I was training. It was just my body's way of going, you've got to heal your emotional wounds here. You can't just like ignore this and do what every climber does, which is just throw themselves into climbing and blank all that stuff out. It's like you've got to grieve here. And I spent this long period doing that, time out. In the end, the kind of elbows settled down a bit, but I felt like I'd lost so much ground. All my friends, all my contemporaries who I was living with in Sheffield had all moved on. They were all climbing much harder grades than me. I felt a bit like the train had left the station without me on it. And then in a kind of twist of fate, I ended up going out and climbing this route called Indian Face, which at the time was the hardest trad route in the UK and probably one of the hardest single pitch trad routes in the world. It was the first ever E9. And there was just this wall, this like surge of motivation that came from this long period of time out and the loss of my girlfriend and this injury that had stopped me from climbing. And it was the furnace, it was the engine of it. But, there's been I know that everyone who's listening to this will relate to this in some way, because we've all had some sort of challenge in our private lives, in our personal lives, that has caused us to go, wow, like climbing now feels really trivial. It feels like unimportant. I've lost all my psych, it's gone. But then in a strange way, climbing becomes the medicine. And like we kind of see climbing as a vehicle for, getting even, turning it back round, like avenging your demons, that sort of thing. And in my life, I've definitely applied myself in that fashion. And whilst I don't have the strongest fingers out there, I feel that my secret weapon in my climbing has been my ability to do this, to like channel the frustration that occurs in day-to-day life. Just turn it into a positive and use climbing as the vehicle.
Man, that is so beautiful. I love that. Thank you for sharing that aspect of it, because I think for so many of us, climbing isn't just a sport or a fun pastime, if you will. It's a lifestyle. In fact, we often describe ourselves as climbers, like I'm a climber. And what does that mean? I'm a dad and I've got a job and I'm a husband, but I'm a climber. And so what you're sharing there, I think will really resonate with those who are listening, whether it's been their profession or not. And for me, it's not my profession, although this podcast in part is my profession, but I really, really relate to what you said there. And I'm curious, if you look back now over the many years that you've been doing this, has that relationship with struggle, or just kind of how climbing has played such a primary role in your life? Has that evolved? Has climbing then kind of on the inverse flowed into the way that you are as a person?
Undoubtedly. I mean, it's become a set piece. You know, when this all happened to me as a young man, it was all very destabilizing and very confusing. And I couldn't really see how I was processing things at the time. You know, you're only able to do that with hindsight when you look back and you go, oh, yeah, that was what was going on. That's why my elbows got injured. That's why I lost my Psych. That's why I came back and smashed it. And you see the pattern. I mean, so last year, my mum was very unwell and I was her sole carer, and she was living at the other side of the UK to me. So I was making a lot of, I mean, like yourself, I've got young kids, but I was also, you know, I was traveling to and fro across the country to look after my mum. And she sadly passed away in October. But you see, I knew while this was going on, like, not to pursue big climbing goals. It was like, don't be an idiot. You've got enough stress here. I mean, I was really enjoying listening to your Instagram post this morning with Bill Ramsey, of course, talking about his suffering model. And it's like the two types of suffering. And, you know, climbing it is, if you push it really hard, I don't know if I like the term suffering. But it is a form of self-induced stress, let's call it.
Sure.
And, you know, when things were going on with my mum, I just needed to focus on her, look after myself, be kind to myself, look after my family. And, you know, you weather the storm and it'll pass, you know. And this year was, you know, I think there was something about the new year for me this year. And, you know, like, and especially now that it's spring here in the UK, you just feel the green shoots already. It's like, right, okay, I'm getting the Psych back on now. I'm having some good sessions on the board. You know, there's a few boulders locally that I wouldn't mind. You know, I'm not, you know, thinking too big at this stage. There's a few local boulders that I'd quite like to tick off. And it's, oh, yeah, I recognise how this works. And you just feel it all spiralling and coming back. And my body feels ready for it. My mind feels ready for it. I feel ready for it emotionally. But the mistake would obviously have been to have like ignored the obvious signs and to have pushed on hard with my training during that period when I was caring for my mum. You know, you've got to just, but equally, of course, you don't want to drop the ball with climbing altogether. Mm-hmm. I mean, separate conversation, but I remember Leo Holding when we were younger, he badly broke his ankle and he didn't climb for a year. He had his foot in plaster. First trip back, we went to Fontainebleau and he flashed a 7C plus, you know, but so there are some people who can take a year out of climbing and it doesn't really affect them. But if I took a year out of climbing, I don't think I'd ever come back. You know, mm-hmm. And back to what I was saying at the start, possibly because I've never been one of those like sort of naturally genetically gifted climbers. You know, I have to keep the plate spinning. And so that's what I did last year, you know, just spinning the plates. Like, and, you know, it's actually a really good feeling to treat climbing more like yoga, you know, or like keep fit. It's just something that you do because it makes you feel good. You know, when you take, because we're all so used to just like attaching the goal to climbing. It's like we're aiming for something here. You know, we're climbers. We're terrible for this. We're obsessed with it, but we love it. You know, it's like, oh, I'm training for this. I'm training for this. I'm training for this. That's been my whole life. So to actually say to myself last year, I'm not training for anything. I'm going to go down the wall, knock out a few boulders. I'm not following a training plan. Or maybe I'll do a session of circuits, or maybe I'll just chat to some people. I don't really care. You know, it was actually really fun and really cathartic. And, you know, then this year, it meant also that when I started to pick things up with my training, I'm not starting from like right down the bottom. I'm actually starting from a reasonably decent level. And, you know, like I don't want to get too existential here, but I think it's inevitable that things have to go this way because we cannot just keep pushing all the time. We have to have breaks, and they either get forced upon us or we choose to take them. But, you know, it has to ebb and flow. Mm-hmm. Just like when I set a training program for anyone, it's not just like go, all out, all the way through. You know, there's rhythm and tempo to it. You know, it evolves, it progresses, then you come off the gas, there's a deload week, and then it builds up again. It's like, you know, things have to go this way. But I think, you know, like if I look back and see, you know, the difference is that as a young man, I was probably just trying to go all out all the time and not accepting the inevitable.
Well, as you said, hindsight is 20/20 on this kind of thing. And sometimes we need to have that perspective. But part of my role here as a podcaster is to then help climbers that are in their teens or 20s or 30s to hopefully learn from what I've done, what you've done, and what others. And you are, what are you, 50, 54? Got it. Okay. So yeah, great perspective. And thank you for sharing that, by the way, Neil. And my heart goes out to you for the challenging year that you had last year. And I appreciate you opening up about it, because I think that's quite relatable as well. And certainly as we get older, my wife and I were talking about this the other day, because there was like this chart that came up that showed the happiness curve, or it's actually like a happiness trough. And essentially like you're very happy like in your teens and 20s. And then as you get into your like kind of 30s and 40s, the happiness hits like this trough because there's more stress in life. And for many people, not everyone, but for many people, that's also a time where you're taking care of young kids, but also potentially taking care of elderly parents. And so there's just like a lot of expectation and stress and career and ego death and, midlife crises and all this stuff. And then as you get into your 50s, you're going on the up again, and mid 50s to 60s, you're basically back up to kind of the happiness level of where you were when you were in your 20s. And so anyway, we're just in it right now, man. We're just in it, but better days ahead.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's how you frame it, isn't it? There's definitely like with, exasperating moments where you just feel like you're not coping with it. You've totally lost all semblance of control. But, my hardest routes were all climbed during this period of my life, when my kids were pretty young and everything at home just felt like total chaos. And I think, again, that was the trick. It was like, you get out on the crag and you're like, well, however hard trying to do my first 8C plus feels, or however hard trying to do my first E11 feels, it's not as hard as bringing kids up. And it isn't. I was out there on the crag thinking my wife has got the worst deal today,
So true.
But also I think, of course, I mean, I've probably spoken about this before. Also, of course, having kids gives you that change of perspective. You realize there's something more important than climbing, which you kind of knew all along anyway, but you just wouldn't accept. It's like, and then suddenly it's like, you're okay, you have to accept this now. There's other priorities here. And that, for me, really took the pressure off. And, you're hearing so many people say, oh, that's it, I've got kids, end of my climbing now. And so you're thinking, right, well, okay, so it's supposed to be end of my climbing. So therefore, like, okay, let's just take a cheeky punt on this on the side and just like see what happens, under the radar. Like, this isn't supposed to be my time. And therefore, in accordance with the sweet laws of reverse psychology, it becomes your time.
Yes. And how old were you when you did Lexicon, when you did the 8C plus? This was like around my age, I think. I'm 46 right now.
Yeah, I did the 8C plus at 46 or 47. And then I did Lexicon at 51.
Incredible.
11. Yeah.
Oh, let's go. All right. Let's dive into it, Neil. Let's really unpack this climbing career of yours and also this coaching career of yours. Are you more famous as a climber or a coach these days, do you think?
I've got absolutely no idea. I mean, I was better known as a coach during the kind of magazine era because I wrote for most of the periodicals. I wrote for Climber magazine and High magazine.
Going back to the 90s.
Magazine. Started in 93.
Yeah.
I wrote for those magazines for a couple of decades, until Climber fizzled out round about whenever it was, like 2012, 2013, maybe that stopped. But I also wrote for Rock and Ice and Climbing. I wrote a bit for Rock Punks, like I did, and I used to love it. I was writing training articles every month. And then when all the periodicals kind of went online, everything just kind of changed a bit, really. Yeah. And I don't do so much of that anymore. I guess a lot of people, because I was thinking maybe like I was known for that stuff. But actually, now that I think about it, if I bump into someone when I'm climbing abroad, someone taps me on the shoulder, I usually know what they're going to say. And they often just say the same thing, which is, oh, you taught me to climb. And I sort of slightly cringe a little bit because they're referring to my Masterclass films, which I put on YouTube. Yeah. And I say I cringe because they're like dead old fashioned now. And the music's this like kind of psy-trance, like you can tell they're like from the start of the century.
Right.
But I made those films, you see, and they were DVDs. And then, of course, DVD died out as a medium. And then I just stuck them on YouTube. And I wish I was more business minded, because I think I was the first coach to put instructional films, certainly technique instructional films, on YouTube. They predate anything. If I'd kept going, I'd probably be like a sort of multi-millionaire YouTuber now, because I'd have been like first in the algorithm. But I never posted anything since. And the funny thing about those films is that, yeah, they look super old fashioned. So many people say, oh, they're cult classics, why don't you remake them? And the main reason I wouldn't remake them is because if I did, I'd just shoot them in a modern climbing gym on brightly colored macro holds and update the music. But in terms of the content and what I'd actually say, I would barely change them, because the content, I feel like training has evolved so much more in terms of the physical, strength training, power training, endurance training. The technique lessons in those masterclass films are kind of timeless. Mm-hmm. Like the importance of when you learn to climb on vertical walls, and then you try and climb on an overhang the same way with your hips parallel, and your knees turned out, and you just you barn door off. You don't have the balance, and then you discover stepping through, twisting in, using your outside edge, doing drop knees, and then you counterbalance with flags and all that type of stuff. It's just that stuff is still the same.
Physics hasn't changed.
No, funnily enough, it hasn't. And I think that was what people liked about those films was because also it's kind of easier to chat about training because it's more formulaic, and because those films focus more on the technique and movement side. It was stuff that the masses didn't really have access to at the time. I mean, I'm sure there's like absolutely tons of it on YouTube now. I'm sure it's gone in the opposite direction, but yeah, like those, I think a lot of people saw those films and seemed to enjoy them.
Hey, I'm really psyched to say that Arc'teryx has come aboard to support me and the podcast, and I just couldn't be more excited because Arc'teryx, as I'm sure you know, is just one of the most well-regarded, highest-performing brands in the outdoor space, and that is evidenced by their athlete team, many of whom we've had on the show here. Friends of the show, Jonathan Segrist, Drew Ruana, Amity Warm, Jordan Cannon, so many more out there are crushing it in Arc'teryx gear. They take really, really good care of their athlete team, and they take the best care of me and everybody else who wears Arc'teryx gear, because this stuff holds up. Right now, this is a podcast, so you can't see what I'm wearing, but I am wearing the Delta Half Zip pullover. It's bright orange. I'm sure you've seen me in my interviews and climbing in this thing. It is crazy soft. It's crazy lightweight. And I'm also loving right now, kind of in these spring, summer temperatures where we're going to be getting some rain if I'm hiking into the trails or I'm going for a little adventure with my family, the Gamma lightweight hoodie, super, super soft. It's super comfortable. It's got a hood with a little visor on it. It packs really small. Everything that Arc'teryx makes is just of the highest quality. It lasts forever. They've been doing it for over 35 years. They love climbing, and I love them. You can learn more over at their website. You can hit that link in the show notes or swing over to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/Arc'teryx. This episode is supported by patrons of the show. If you're a Patreon member, you're not hearing this because you get ad-free episodes. But if you are hearing this, I would love for you to consider becoming a Patreon member. I've got over 100 hours of bonus content over on Patreon. That includes extended interviews, bonus episodes, as well as pro clinics with the absolute biggest names in the sport. I'm hustling really hard over here in the podcast/utility closet, and I'm really proud of how big this struggle community has grown. Whatever your budget is, and even if you can only pop in for a few months, you could come check it out and for a few bucks, get yourself access to all of that amazing content. So if you're serious about training and climbing, if you're serious about these athletes, I think you are because you're listening to this right now, I'd love to invite you over to Patreon to check it out. There's that link right there down in your show notes, or you can learn more over at patreon.com/thestruggleclimbingshow. Thank you so much for your support. I'd love to hear from you. Hit me up. Let me know how I can continue to deliver great stuff for you. And now let's get back to this fantastic conversation. So training is our first chapter up here, and we'll look at this through the lens of you as a climber who trains hard, but also as a coach who works with climbers from elite professionals to weekend warriors like myself, or our friend Dusty, who was a recent weekend warrior on the show here. And we'll enter into it through the lens of struggle, as we like to do, Neil. So what's a struggle for you when it comes to training?
gaining and maintaining strength. For me personally, endurance has always come more naturally to me. And in particular with age, it almost feels like endurance comes for free because endurance is so inherently tied up with kind of movement, mindset, like climbing style. It's like I don't necessarily know whether I've got more endurance in the tank than I had in my 20s and 30s, but it just feels like I've got more in the tank because I can make better use of the tank. So endurance is something that doesn't worry me, but strength is a constant battle. And I think also because one compares oneself to your contemporaries and the people that you see climbing similar routes. And when I look at, for example, the people who climbed Lexicon, they've all bouldered font 8B plus and above, and most of them have bouldered font 8C. Now, I boulder font 7C on a good day, maybe 7C plus, and these guys are like
V10. You're saying for the V scale for those people out there. You're saying like they're up in the V14, V15 range, and you're in the kind of V10. Got it.
V9 to 10. V10 would be absolute top whack for me when I'm on top form. Usually I'm bouldering more like V8 to V9 on a typical week. And I just think it's probably like anything in climbing and in life. I haven't probably focused enough on bouldering because of all the climbing disciplines that I do. It's probably the one that I'm least connected to. I don't go on bouldering trips. If the weather's good and the rock's dry, I usually go trad climbing, sport climbing, deep water soloing. Bouldering has been more of a means to an end for me. It's been a tool for developing the strength and skill for root cruxes. And hey, guess what? No surprise. If that's your approach, you're never going to get as strong as someone who says bouldering is the end goal. Bouldering is the main event.
Sure.
And
is that what you're using primarily to build that strength, is bouldering, or are you doing off the wall strength training?
Oh, sure. Off the wall as well. Sure. Okay. Yeah. I mean, a combination of board climbing, in more recent years, lifting training, historically, hangboard, campus board. Yeah. There's a plethora of things.
Essentially, you've identified this as a weakness. So you're having to put multi-prong emphasis on it. It sounds like.
I think it's almost become like, 80-20 in favor of my time spent bouldering these days, possibly even like in recent months, 90-10, I put all this time into bouldering and see relatively little gains. And yet I just do a little bit of top up endurance work and I feel pretty fit and I'm recovering on long routes, steep routes, no problem, moving pretty well. It sometimes gets me questioning, should I even bother? Like, should I, more accept that strength is a harder fight for me and play more to my strength, which is endurance, but that's been my approach historically. I think, with age, it's particularly important to keep fighting the battle against strength losses. And that's what I guess I feel like I'm doing much of the time, but that's just me personally as an athlete. Like we hear this all the time, which do you lose more quickly, strength or endurance? And of course, it does depend on the climber, not just on their age, but on their body type, but above all on what they do most of all. I mean, someone who spends most of their life bouldering, will probably find that what little endurance they gain, they lose pretty quickly, whereas they hang on to this high baseline of strength. Conversely, someone like myself, I have this high baseline of endurance. I don't lose it very much. And if I do, I get it back super fast, but the strength is another whole story. So, it really, and that's the kind of the one of the many aspects of diagnosis that I'll use with people that I'm working with and, considering how their time is best spent, taking into account their weaknesses and their goals.
Well, I'd love to explore that a little bit. If the goal for a climber who's coming into you is to build strength, maybe let's focus there first, and then we can shoot to endurance, because I'm about to tuck into an endurance building phase myself. I'm just coming off of a bouldering phase and was very successful in becoming the strongest I've ever been in my life in my mid-40s, which was great. But now I'm about to shift back to endurance. So we can maybe even take a look at me for a second here. But if a client's coming in, and this could be, you could talk through the lens of Tim or of Dusty or anybody else, how are you determining how to best build strength for them if that is the goal?
There's a whole range of factors. I mean, when I gather information prior to compiling a training plan. It's usually via a questionnaire, which is on my website. And the questionnaire is super detailed. And of course, if there's any information that isn't covered in the questionnaire, people just send it on in a separate email. 9 times out of 10, that questionnaire is sufficient. Sometimes we'll also do a WhatsApp call as well, and we'll chat through things. But in very few cases, we'll actually get together and do a one-to-one session. I mean, that's clearly not possible for a lot of people. But in the form, I'm gathering things like, as you mentioned, climbing history. Then I'm also asking people like a bunch of stuff about their perceived strengths and weaknesses right across the board. Everything from like, whether they're stronger half crimp and open, whether they're better at like dynamic strength, like pulling through, or whether they're better at lock-off strength, whether they struggle with compression, whether they struggle with gastons, whether they struggle with undercuts, what their core tension is like, even their leg strengths, like everything. I asked them about this. And of course, people can't always self-assess. So in addition, I asked them for metrics and these days it's like I ask for more and more metrics, but I don't want to be a pain and, because you don't want to get people doing too many tests. But I've narrowed it down to what I consider to be the real essentials, which are things like a half crimp dead hang and an open, like 3-finger drag dead hang. Then there's a pull-up or lock-off test. Then there's either a leg raise, like an L-sit or a front lever. Then there's a pickup, like a lifting with a 20 mil lifting edge. And then there's a push-up, which can be performed with added weight. And so I take a bunch of metrics as well. And then I look at what they've said about themselves and look at their history. But ultimately, like any other coach, when it comes to the crunch, I lick my finger, stick it in the air, and I just use my intuition for the approach, because there is no formula here, and what you do is you just draw on this vast bank of experience because I was first asked to do a plan for someone in 1995, and I've done over 3,000 personalized plans for people across the years, and what this is just, it's a simple matter of pattern recognition. Just like your doctor, your GP, when you describe your symptoms, they go, oh, yeah, la, 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 that's one of those. It's the same thing. I go, okay, so you're 43, you're aiming for AA, you're strong open, but you're weak half crimp, and the route you want to do is like quite overhanging, and it's like, it's on crimp. And then you go, oh, yeah, I remember I've seen like 6 or 7 or 8 or maybe 10 guys like you before, and one of them, I tried this approach, it wasn't so effective. Another one, I tried this approach, it was pretty cool, but that person said maybe you could have made these changes. And then the third time I nailed it and I did this really cool plan for this person and they smashed it out. And you're just going back through the memory archives like that. Or you might even be like actually digging into some of these previous plans that you set for someone, who had a similar set of circumstances. And that's the approach. And I mean, you're also looking at like what facilities they've got available. I mean, these days people tend to have a full range of facilities, but you're trying to get people to do different things. And that was the main thing with Tim's plan, that it was about getting him to do different things, because he had quite a narrow range of facilities. And he was also training for one thing, which was therefore by definition quite narrow. It was a 9A that was like, on average, like 45 degrees overhanging on pockets and like slopey pebbles. And like, the patterns in his training were all very, very similar and had been over the years. So it was kind of like the ultimate contradiction is like, how can I make him do something different, but yet still is really specific to the route? Right. Do you see what I mean? And, it was also in Tim's case, it was about looking at the things in his training that I thought we should keep, because they were still working, and then looking at the things that perhaps had stagnated and needed a freshen up. But someone like Tim is, of course, he was completely different to someone like Dusty, who's what we would call more of a weekend warrior, just as psyched as Tim, but with not much time to train. Someone like Dusty, it's much more about stripping it down to the core. What are the most important things that this guy needs to do? We're not going to waste his time with any junk miles, with any stuff that may not be centrally relevant. We've got to only do the important stuff, and we've got to look at like little hacks for combining things. Like, can he do his like forearm extensor training while he's doing his leg stretches? Yeah, sure he can. Can he do a bit of this while he's doing a bit of that in his rest gaps to make his training time more efficient? Mm-hmm. Giving him options for shortening the session. What happens if he takes 2 sets out of his endurance session and then shortens the recovery time by 5 minutes between each one? Will it still work? Yes. that's the sort of conversation we're having with someone like Dusty, whereas with someone like Tim, it's kind of the opposite. It's like he's got all the time in the world to train, and so you can throw everything at him, but then woe betide if you throw too much at him, because Tim had little injury concerns before. He'd had this elbow tendonitis. And you're speaking of contradictions, like he needed to improve his pinch, but he had tennis elbow. He was just over like his previous campaign on Eravea had been thwarted, not just by like wet rock, but he had bad elbows. But yeah, you could see he needed to get stronger on pinches, and like, that was such a worry for me. And I had a protocol up my sleeve, which I would like to have tested more, but I remembered being really quite effective for someone who had grumbly elbows, but needed to do some lifting. It was this 5 on, 5 off sequence, and it really seemed to work. Tim's pinch got stronger, but he also said that his elbows felt more robust. So I was really psyched about that. Sorry, I'm flitting to and fro between Tim and Dusty. They're so dissimilar. But the biggest thing about Tim was that the sheer weight of responsibility. And I haven't really spoken about this before. I've let Tim do all the talking, but I just had to play it so cool. I had to just play it like, yeah, man, we're doing a bit of training here. And, like, as if he was just like, as if it was like no big deal. It was nothing in particular, as opposed to this route that he'd put 8 years of his life into. And also because, and I had to try and he's like one of my best friends. I mean, he was the best man at my wedding. I've traveled all around the world with this guy. I mean, he's like a dear friend, but I had to like detach and step back and adopt this kind of like more business-like persona with him, because we had to keep it professional. And like I was so conscious that this was his last campaign. And I know the listener might think, oh yeah, he could have just gone again, but believe me, he wasn't going to go again. Like that was it, and I just felt like I had the whole thing, it was like it was a huge weight of responsibility to get that plan right. But, I had to, all the time when I spoke with him about it, exude total confidence. Like, yes, Tim, this is the right protocol in your hangboard session. Yes, Tim, that's the right amount of rest that you've got here. Like that's exactly the session you need to be doing. I had to. But like, man, I was, I was like behind. I was just thinking, what if this doesn't work?
Yeah.
And I repeat, there isn't a formula. Like, any coach who tells you that they've got this like definite formula, they're kidding. I mean, these are human beings we're dealing with here. And I mean, and take into account the stuff we were talking about earlier with like, external stuff, things going on in people's lives. Like. Tim's a father, he's got other responsibilities. There's all this stuff that's cocktailing in. And so, ultimately, you've just got to give it your best shot. And so I was just like, it was a huge thrill for me when he did that route. It was really incredible. I mean, one of the big moments for me in coaching, no doubt.
So excited to actually peel back more on what you just touched on there, which was the pressure that was not only on Tim, but by extension was on you, knowing that this was very likely the last campaign. And he really true to Hollywood cinematic fashion, brought it down to the wire. And so I've got a couple specific questions on that, in fact, that I'm going to save for the mental game chapter that comes a little bit later. But to put a cherry on the training chapter, if we could, because of this perspective that you have, because you've got this encyclopedia to dip into of 3,000 custom plans, I'm going to put you on the spot to see if there are some patterns that you're able to recognize looking back for the general listener right now that you're not assessing specifically because they haven't done your questionnaire or any assessments. Where do you see now, whether it's building strength or fitness or just becoming a better climber in general, certain tools or certain protocols that come up more often than not that are either quite effective or quite ineffective?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you don't want to freestyle too much. Like in terms of there is a template for, I mean, in my head, I operate with approximately like 4 levels, let's call them beginner, intermediate, advanced, elite. And there's a certain amount of load for each of those climbers at those levels, and a certain amount of training that you should do in the week. And if you do, significantly more than that, you're going to get bad results. You're going to injure this person. They're going to get burnt out. It's going to go badly wrong. And, conversely, too little, and this person's probably going to get back to you and say, hey, I did a lot of resting. I didn't really improve too much.
Right.
So what's interesting, though, is people's expectations. I know I can see there are some coaches or coaching outfits that tend to set like a lot of training, and there's I felt this myself as an athlete over the years, and I've really felt this as a coach, because the problem is when you go online, all you see Adam Andre, you see Alex Magos, you see these top climbers who train 3 times a day, every day. Right. And there's still going to be that thing. If we copy them, we're going to end up climbing as well as them, but we won't. What's going to happen is we're going to get burnt out and injured. Right. So I have to sometimes grit my teeth. I've had people complain and say, Gresham, you've sent me this training plan. What? It's like half full. Where's all the training? And I'm like, seriously? I'm not prepared to give you any more. I give you another half hour here and there, but really, that's your quota. And they're like, oh, not sure about this. And I'm like, okay, give it a chance, And sure enough, this person's, reporting back going, oh, wow, I actually feel fresh. I actually feel really recovered. I feel strong. I feel like the quality of my work has improved. It's like, yeah, that's the point. So yeah, that happens a lot. And I think that, in terms of what doesn't work, it's, is just over, as I said earlier, I felt pressure sometimes as a coach to deliver more. And I feel, because I know, most of these top climbers, I've, spent a lot of time with some of the world's best climbers in particular when I do athlete meets for Petzl and La Sportiva, you get to chat to people. Sure. And you just, and you know how much training these guys do. And it is tempting to sort of try and copy to a certain degree. Every time I do personally, I just get shut down. And it just reminds me what I know, what I've always known, which is that you've just got to find the right approach for a mere mortal and for a person of your level. And don't think that by training the way the elites train, you'll get to climb as well as them. Mm-hmm. Typically, when I was training for Sabotage, which was my first 8C+, I was doing day on, 2 days off. Or at least I'd do a hard climbing, finger-based day, climbing specific day. Then the following day would be maybe some antagonist gym, strength conditioning, but not fingers. And then the third day would just be maybe some either nothing or just some little bit of light stretching and an ice bath and, some recovery type stuff. And then I'd go again, just to really maximize that feeling of quality. Pretty much same for when I was training for Lexicon. But all the time, meantime, you're going on Instagram and you're seeing people training 3 times a day, every day. Right. And you just have to hold your nerve. But this is such a positive message for the weekend warrior. I'm hoping for the majority of people who, I want to cut through the myth here. And I want to speak very a positive message to the majority of people who are listening here and thinking, I don't have the time to train daily or twice a day, every day, or whatever all these top climbers do. And I'm saying to you, that's a positive. That's great, because you don't want to do that amount of training. You're not going to climb better. You're gonna get trashed. Just keep the approach that I adopted for Dusty. It's just establish what's important, establish what's relevant to you and your goals. Keep the quality up, maximize your recovery. Remember, it's when you're recovering that's when you improve, and stay true to that and believe in that, and you will see results.
Love it, man. And that is the value of having a coach. And I'm a self-coached climber the majority of my climbing year, but I also talk to a lot of coaches and athletes. And so then it's a bit of analysis paralysis, but specifically and directly working with a coach to prescribe to you the proper load and the rest, and then to be that voice in your ear saying, no, you're good. That's really nice. So listen, let Neil just record that clip and play it back to you climbers who are listening right now, and make sure you prioritize those recovery days. All right, y'all, I just want to take a quick second here to tell you how I'm keeping my fingers strong and healthy, as I've been training harder than I've ever trained in my entire life. I'm doing 2 Kilter board sessions a week, plus 2 to 3 dedicated heavy finger workouts a week. So that means like block lifts, overcoming isometrics, or one-arm dead hangs. I've been working those into the routine recently, and that's putting a lot of stress on my fingers, my muscles, and also my connective tissue. And the way that I am taking care of my fingers and how I believe I've stayed injury-free during this really intense training block is by taking supercharged collagen by our friends over at PhysiVantage every single day. So before I climb or before I do a finger training workout, I mix some supercharged collagen into my coffee or tea or just into some water. And as you probably know, collagen is the primary structural protein in our tendons and ligaments. And so supercharged collagen from PhysiVantage delivers specific collagen peptides plus vitamin C, which studies show can help stimulate collagen synthesis, and it goes right where you need it, which for us as climbers is to our fingers. And now you can get 15% off your order over at PhysiVantage.com by using code STRUGGLE15. That link is right down there in your show notes. Struggle15 is going to get you 15% off. It supports the podcast. I hope you are getting after it with your training and your climbing. Let's go. This is a great opportunity for us, actually, Neil, to transition into this next chapter, which is on nutrition, but also I focus it on recovery just in general. So kind of nutrition and beyond, if you will. And let's talk about it through your lens first as a climber and somebody who trains hard and has been in their 20s and 30s and 40s and now 50s. Any patterns, any struggles in the nutrition or recovery game, and any patterns that you've seen, I guess, building on what you've said there about rest, but anything kind of specific to you that you found that has either been a struggle or that has had an outsized benefit for recovery or performance?
Yeah, I mean, I had almost like a kind of a rebirth type moment after turning 40 when it came to this, because prior to that, just during my late teens, 20s and 30s, I just used to adopt what I would consider to be a common sense based approach to nutrition, eating healthily enough, eating a balanced diet, occasionally having a few treats, obviously not being stupid about, eating junk food and that sort of thing. And I always felt that was going to be sufficient. And of course, nutrition is a topic that you can see it's just swamped with all these fads and crazes and companies that are trying to sell you products that are, a lot of which just look like total gimmicks and are completely, obviously not going to give you the results that they're claiming. So I was always a little bit like, I've got this. I don't need to worry about this. I'm just going to, just freestyle my way through this. That was always my approach. And it was actually around about the time I turned 40, and I was working on a project that was nothing to do with nutrition. It was a hangboarding app. And the guy who was doing the photography and design work for that was a nutritionist. And we got talking, and he was like really surprised at how little I knew about nutrition. And he was like, "What? So you've not tried any low inflammation protocols?" And I'm like, "Sorry, I don't know what that means." And he was like, "Really?" And I was like, no, I don't need all that stuff. I've got this covered. And he was like, he said, "You're 40. And he goes, you're a pro athlete, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, are you improving? And I went, not really. And he was like, "Well, how much longer do you think you're going to be like, how much longer are you going to be able to keep this up for, mate?" And I was like, "Well, I don't really know, but I sensed that perhaps I'd had my best days at 40. Mm-hmm. And he was like, "Well, I think you really need to change your attitude to this and like be a bit more, get yourself up to date, get yourself knowledgeable and try out some modern nutrition strategies." And he managed to get me to bite the cherry. And, he was talking to me a lot, in fact, about primarily low inflammation protocols, but also linked with low carb eating and to an extent with keto, which I know is a very controversial subject, but nonetheless, aspects of keto came into this. And I started off, I was very, very skeptical. And I just said, "Look, give me your 3 or 4 most important changes or things that I should do." And he was like, "Okay." And he listed them and I did them. And at the time I was working on this deep water solo project. I'd failed on it the year previously. And I started eating, the way Glenn was advising me to eat. And I went out and I smashed this project. And it's easy to be sort of cynical and say, "Well, yeah, you probably just lost a bit of weight." And whilst maybe I did, I wouldn't say that was the main factor. It was the main thing that blew my mind was how much better I recovered. Mm-hmm. I noticed myself recovering better in my early 40s than I was recovering in my 20s. you know.
Well, and what, just if you could, and we probably don't need to do a super deep dive on this, but you were saying up to this point, you were eating a healthful diet. It sounds like, by the way, just what you explained is it's basically a diet like I eat, which is just like, you know, there's a little bit of fun stuff here and there, but it's mostly kind of high quality whole foods and this kind of thing. But so again, you weren't subsisting on Mountain Dew and cigarettes and donuts. So you were having like a fairly healthful diet. And then you saw a dramatic improvement in how you were recovering and performing. So what were the key changes?
The key for, so the most important thing, I mean, obviously, of course, like, alcohol was out. Like, no, not that I was ever a big drinker, but he was like, in order to give this a chance, you actually have to stop drinking, like not even on weekends, just like cut it out.
Full stop, total cut out. Okay.
Full stop, no booze. And then he said, same with sugar, like cold turkey on all sugar. And I was like, well, what about fruit? And he said, unfortunately, no fruit. And I was like, really? And so where am I going to get all my micros from? And he said, well, you're going to go up on greens, like on green veg and salad stuff to compensate for the fact that you're going down on the fruit. And then the next one, but this was the thing that blew my mind. He was like, no wheat. And I was like, man, I eat wheat for breakfast, lunch. And, you know, it's like toast for breakfast, sandwich for lunch, pasta for dinner. And he was like, it's out. And I was like, I'm going to starve. What am I actually going to eat? Wow. And he worked through a few, you know, like alternatives and substitutes with me. But those are the biggest changes that I made to start with. And I definitely just found myself feeling sharper, more like my body just felt less sluggish. You know, I felt faster, like my reaction times felt better. I just felt more athletic. And as I say, I was recovering better. But I also noticed that I wasn't getting hunger pangs, and no surprise, because it's any kind of, I mean, obviously, especially sugary foods, but even like, you know, your kind of so-called complex carbohydrates like pasta and bread, which I used to live off, they spike your insulin levels and you get a bit of a high and then a bit of a low after that. And that causes the hunger pangs, and you're not genuinely hungry. You're off the back of the insulin response. And so I noticed myself getting less hungry and not comfort eating as much, and not, because I was always like wanting to eat cakes and snacks and this sort of thing. And I found myself stopping. I just didn't crave them anymore. And then when with my breakfast, when I just went for this super high protein breakfast with eggs and fish and spinach and this sort of thing, it was really, really incredible, because I just felt like I had this consistent energy, and I'd get to lunchtime and I'd have some lunch, but I wouldn't be starving hungry. And, and I could eat the right amount of food for me, what I should eat, rather than what I wanted to eat for for comfort purposes. And what he was doing, Glenn, was he eased me into a low carb. It wasn't like no carbs. It was like, there was actually not many carbohydrates during the day. But then he said to me, try eating some very low GI, which is glycemic index, low GI carbs in the evening. And I was like, hang on, carbs in the evening? I thought it was like carbs in the morning or during the day, and then cut carbs out. And he was like, oh no, like flip it, man. He was like, on the day you run on fats. And he said, when you need glycogen, when you need or you're more likely to need carbohydrates is at night when you're asleep. I'm like, what? But I'm asleep. Isn't this for energy? He's like, it's for recovery. He's like, what? It's the carbs that feed the recovery process whilst you're asleep. So you feed that, you hit that anabolic curve, but during the day you're running on. He was talking about this sort of metabolic optimization, where you become like a hybrid car. So you can basically run on fat or you can run on carbohydrates. But what you don't, of course, do is try and run on both simultaneously, because you're just going to put on weight, and it's not going to be good for cholesterol and all this sort of thing. So look, I'm going to just say here to anyone who's listening, I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not a qualified nutritionist. And I'm speaking here more as an athlete who benefited from working with a very knowledgeable nutritionist. And anyway, next time round, I took a deeper dive with this. This is when I was aiming for, for my first 8C. Mm-hmm. And then also I went even deeper when I was aiming for my first 8C plus. And when I was going for sabotage, the 8C plus, I said to Glenn, just give me everything you've got, and I cut out dairy. I was really strict with my carbohydrate sources. I was only going for quinoa and sweet potato, which are really low glycemic index. I was taking like, magnesium, using magnesium spray. I was like, oh crumbs, like I can't even remember now, but like I was, like it was that kind of marginal gains, no stone unturned approach. And I felt incredible. I felt amazing. And it was like listening to Bill talking about suffering. And this is a very, very sensitive and controversial topic, because all the while I was doing this, I felt great. I felt in control of what I was doing. I was climbing better. I was recovering better. I was sleeping better. I was mentally clearer when I was at my desk. It was like, seriously, man, what's not to like here? And this was all happening as a result of nutrition, right? This was specifically a result of training wise. I was doing. There was a lot, set pieces, things that I'd done before. There wasn't so much like this. This was the thing that was making the difference. But now what I could see is the danger, the pitfall of someone going, okay, this is really working for me. So now I'm going to push it further and further. And then, this person starts to restrict their calories, and then they get into a difficult and darker headspace. And we know what goes on from that point, Yeah. So inherently, like fundamentally, I feel nervous about this message, because I want people to understand what I'm saying here. It's not like, oh, cut your calories, make yourself really hungry, make yourself like unwell, and it's that is not what we're talking about.
No, that was the strategy of climbers like in the 80s, if you will. But it's talking like you're not underfueling. In fact, you were maybe even overfueling, because you're just eating a lot of green vegetables and having these big protein meals that were then just carrying you through. You weren't feeling hungry, it sounds like.
No, never feeling hungry. And so therefore, I don't believe that you should be suffering in any way, like physically or mentally or emotionally whilst doing this. And I never, and I never did. I mean, it was, you hear stories about, climbers like bonking, like sort of, feeling faint at the crag and this type of thing, or like, not managing the walk in, and like none of these things ever happened to me, but here's the rub, right? This is no different to training. If you train and train and train really hard all the time, you know what happens. It's the same with nutrition. Like if you really like rev your nutrition up to the level where you're kind of cutting out a load of stuff, and you're eating a restrictive diet, and the number of calories you're taking in are right on the cusp. You keep doing this, and especially if you push it too far, the result is the same as it would be with training. You're going to get burnt out, and it's all going to start going wrong. So it requires, the powers of objectivity. You need to know yourself, and you need to personalize the approach. I know it's such a cliche, but really here the approach needs to be personalized. I mean, especially when it comes to nutrition science. I mean, what's working for me here is not necessarily going to work for you, or it might be, you might have to find your variant on that. And Glenn's approach, it wasn't prescriptive. He wasn't eat this and not that. It was like, try cutting this out, get back to me, tell me how it feels, and if that works, then I'll tell you the next step. It wasn't a case of he was just sort of dishing out some formulaic approach. So right. You have to be prepared to invest in it, and you have to be prepared to, experiment to a certain degree. But meeting Glenn and following his methodology was one of the most significant things that happened to me in my climbing, certainly in the kind of second chapter of my climbing career. And ultimately, he enabled me to develop and refine the strategies which I used to climb Lexicon, which was the biggest route of my life. And I really am in his debt for that.
Well, that's my big takeaway from this, Neil, and I appreciate you sharing just such a personal and detailed version of that journey that you've been on since turning 40 or thereabouts, because while you're right, it's super highly individualized, and what might work for you may not work at all for me or somebody else who's listening. But the takeaway for me here is that there's potentially, for a lot of people listening, a big stone that's been left unturned. If we've been focusing very heavily most of our energy and attention for improving our climbing on training or on crag tactics or fixing our mental game if we've got a fear of falling and all these very important pillars, But one of the things we haven't focused at all on is nutrition and maybe experimenting with some things that might work better. Like I really like in your case, you were having a pretty healthful diet, it sounds like. But Glenn was like, hey, try some things and see what happens. And you tried some things and some big things happened. So it's very cool to hear
big things happened.
Yeah, there's just perhaps opportunity out there for anybody who's listening. And I've done some great episodes in the past with nutritionists and dietitians who include Tom Herbert, the Useful Coach, Dave McLeod, Caitlin Holmes, Amity Warm, people who are very experienced and have an expertise and degrees for some of them in these areas. So I could encourage you all to go back and listen to some of those, but also you could just grab a call with somebody and chat through it and experiment around and see what works. And so for you, just to close out this chapter, Neil, if I'm understanding what you were saying towards the end there correctly, you treat this like you would treat maybe a training cycle where you're trying to peak. This is not a diet that you is part of your day-to-day lifestyle. You bring this in when you really want to get all of the extra percentiles that you need. And same thing with your physical training as well. You're trying to peak at the same time.
So when the results really happen are when you sync the nutrition strategy with the training. So let's start with, the way any training plan should start, which is with a period of rest. In the off period, when you're either you're probably doing very little climbing and you're not pushing things, you just eat as you want. Just eat the food that you enjoy, because you're going to start toughening up soon, and cutting things out. So you might as well be kind to yourself, go and just have some great food and with your family and not be fussed about it. That's how it starts. Then you're going to go into if you go into like a base building phase, you need to just make sure that you're first and foremost consuming sufficient calories. And there's a strategy. I can't go into detail here. We just haven't got time. But there's like a strategy for the base phase of the plan. Then there's a strategy for the strength phase of the plan. So you're eating in a way that complements the objectives of the phase. Mm-hmm. And then there's a strategy for the endurance phase of the plan. And then you go into the sending phase. Now, I'm not going to kid you. The sending phase, the nutrition that's when it gets quite tough. That's when you're not eating excessively or plentifully. That's when you're really questioning, you're keeping it really tight. And then you send your route, and then the cycle repeats, And I think the key is that having sent your route, the next phase, right, is the rest phase. And as I repeat again, that's the phase when you eat what you want, nice and plentifully. If you have been on a slight calorie deficit, that's when you pay it all back. And if you do it like that, then it's such a powerful tool. You can strike a line down the middle and adopt one way of eating and just do it all the time. But I personally don't think that's as effective, and it certainly doesn't work as well for me. So for anyone who wants to find out more, Glenn and I wrote a little guide to this. I sell it on my website, and it's an introduction to the topic. It's it's obviously such a big topic, but it's written in terms that hopefully climbers will relate to, because of course you can just research this stuff yourself, but a lot of stuff you find online isn't written with climbing in mind. And I just felt that this was such valuable information that I wanted to share with the community. And hey, believe me, it's been a choppy ride. I've had to be very careful how I've communicated about this on social media, because nutrition is such a loaded topic. And you've only got, as soon as you start talking about it, you find yourself, you say a little bit too much, and suddenly people are coming hard at you and saying, whoa, it's really sensitive in climbing. And believe me when I say that I appreciate that. But at the same time, you have to be brave. We can all just take the approach whoa, let's not talk about nutrition just in case someone gets an eating disorder, but then nobody benefits. We have to be brave and try and share this information and enter into, sensible discussions about this. But I repeat, my perspective on this is more as an athlete, as someone who's benefited rather than as the coach, whereas my coach was this guy, Glenn.
I really appreciate it, Neil. And for those listening, I will put a link in the show notes to the guide, to the page on Neil's site there that gives an overview of the guide. And if you want to pick up a copy, you can. Yeah, thank you, man. That was really a surprising conversation. I didn't know I didn't know it
Oh,
was going to go this way, and I'm glad that it did. It's just got my mind just spinning right now as I'm blissfully in the rest phase right now, Neil. I just put down the project last week, and so I'm just going ham, buddy.
oh, it tastes so sweet, doesn't it?
Oh,
Success in
God,
climbing.
it's so good. Ice cream every day right now. I'm just crushing it. It's so fun. It really got me thinking about this next phase that I'm getting into. So that's very cool. We're going to shift gears here and talk about tactics and technique. And we've talked a bit about technique already, about the old school DVDs that you've put out there. And you're quite the tactician. I am not the tactician. So I am excited to have this conversation with you. And I think a good jumping off point for me here is just to get your thoughts as a coach and as a climber on this. I wouldn't say there's a friction, but it's kind of two sides of a coin where we're talking about strength and we're talking about technique. And we've talked about strength already in the training chapter. We'll continue to do it, but what's your take? What's the relationship there? Which is more important if you had to pick a baby?
So a classic discussion that I'm having with a great friend of mine who's a coach in the UK, a guy called Alex Lamel. He's also one of the strongest, if not the strongest climbers in the UK. I mean, this guy is like doing one-armers on the 10 mil edges and all this sort of thing. I mean, if you want to get strong, he's the coach that I recommend, and I go to him for advice in my own climbing. And he's a big advocate of edge lifting in the warm-up for recruitment and for that whole kind of mind-finger connection, And I was actually saying to him only yesterday, that's all well and good, but what about, like, so many people I work with find that movement and technique is the biggest challenge. And if you're warming up predominantly with lifting, you're missing out on those like easier boulders or routes where, which is the kind of golden opportunity for improving and refining your movement. And as such, if you use lifting to warm up, if you're a climber who doesn't have good technique and you're quite strong, you're just going to exacerbate that further. But then when are you going to do your finger strength work? If you do, it's a circular discussion, right?
Sure.
There isn't this kind of like, oh, the best way to warm up is on easy boulders, or the best way to warm up is edge lifting. But every climber should do a phase of both, or try both those different approaches. And, in a phase where you're using easy boulders to warm up and you're working more on movement, then that's going to be the kind of main benefit and the outcome of those sessions. Conversely, if you're warming up with a finger edge, then that you're kind of really doing the best possible thing that you can for your finger strength, but you might be missing out on movement as well. Mm-hmm. And you can't do it all at once, so it makes sense to kind of phase it a little bit. Have I gone off target? Have I gone off topic?
Let's look at the technique side. And so whether it's just climbing boulders as part of a warm up or just technique in general. And I recall reading about you taking ballet to work on a move for lexicon, and that gets a bit into mobility. And so, I mean, all of this is kind of interweaving here, but how do you work with climbers like myself to improve intentionally with our technique rather than just kind of accidentally, if you will?
It's so it really, if you're mainly using like home facilities, if you've just got like a small board at home and you're doing and you've mainly only got access to like hangboards and this sort of thing, it's obviously much more difficult. I mean, you need access to a climbing gym, preferably sure. a reasonable sized one where they're changing the routes and changing the boulders. And then it is a matter of being exactly that. You've got to be intentional in your practice. I mean, you can see people who are just not like mentally connected to their warm up. They're still on their phone. They're checking socials in between each climb. They're distracted. They're probably still like finishing off their work emails when they get to the gym. They're talking to this person, la la la. And then this climber, they will get onto their hard project that they're trying to sand, and you can see that they're just not moving well, they're not connected, and they often end up making like kind of clumsy mistakes. And so the alternative is to warm up in a way where you're very, very focused on every everything is very, very deliberate. And I still revert to those same drills that I recommended in those masterclass films like 20 years ago. So you start off just making sure that every foot goes down perfectly, by which I mean not dragging the toe down the wall, not touching the foothold twice, keeping your eye on the foot until it's on the foothold, not like bouncing the heel and testing smaller footholds, like, weighting it and pushing on it first time, like setting up these rules. And because what you find, which is really quite mind-blowing, is that you think that technique is all about, it's all shades of gray. It's an opinion. Does this person look like they're climbing better or not? Actually, it can boil down to some pretty tight rules. Like, because if you drag your toe down the wall, you've done it. And if you touch the foothold twice, you've done it. It's actually pretty black and white.
Yeah.
And then, you would move on to something like, just focusing on like gripping as minimally as possible, trying to grip a bit more passively. Then you'd like, maybe trying to like lower your shoulders a little bit. Then you'd focus on, like avoiding like moving sort of point to point. Like when we first warm up, it's all very like one limb at a time, move a hand, move a foot, move a hand, move a foot. And you try and get a more continuous wave of motion going on. Then you can try doing some pace drills, like deliberately speed up, tease it to the point where you feel yourself starting to make mistakes, and then just bring it back, like find that kind of cutoff point, like how fast can you go but still maintain form. Conversely, you can try slowing it down a little bit and note the feelings that you get when you climb a little bit more slowly, and just listen to your own feedback. And, you find yourself like becoming more body aware, and like little muscles which you weren't aware of before, you can suddenly feel them tensing, and like being able to relax little things off and being able to shift your movement around. And just this is a bottomless pit of discovery. And the more you look, the more you will find. But you could see two climbers doing the same thing, which is warming up on a bunch of V1s, then a bunch of V2s, then a bunch of V3s, then a V4, and then they try their V5 project. They look like they're doing the same thing, but this one climber who is being very mindful and deliberate in their practice and doing these drills is getting a ton of benefit and value from this exercise, whereas the other climber is just merely warming up their muscles, even though they're both doing exactly the same thing physically. And I'm a firm believer that it's all about using those warm-up climbs as a sort of a laboratory for experimentation. And you got to be able to get it right. You got to be able to climb these easy boulders well, or these easy routes well. Because if you can't do these easy routes well, you're never going to be able to do these hard routes well. And sometimes it is a little bit more a case of you don't know specifically what you did wrong, but you get a feeling that you did something wrong. Maybe you get this feeling that you were swapping feet a bit more than you should. I'm not saying swapping feet is bad, but if you swap feet every other move, then clearly you're doing it too much. You might also get a feeling that you lurched for a hold, you were off balance when perhaps there was a balance position, but you just didn't shift your hips to one side, or you didn't change, like just climb this boulder again, see if you can dig something out second time. That kind of like reviewed, like that reflective practice is so valuable. And, I feel, like I say, as I said at the start, I feel the benefits of this, like of working at this myself over the years, like right now, because it's this stuff that means I'm still able to climb at a high level and makes me really confident that, I don't feel like I'm losing strength or endurance just yet, but if I maybe strength a little bit, but, it's this stuff that can make up for that.
Right.
Because you just become more efficient as a climbing machine as a result of this approach. And, you can do video work, you can set up the tripod and look at your footage. And sometimes that's a real revelation to people. Like a lot of the time, I think people find that they're actually, they look a lot better than they feel. Because speaking of the theme of the show, climbing does feel like such a struggle to all of us, to most of us. And then you look at yourself and you're like, oh, wow, that's not so bad after all, which can be quite, a pleasant surprise. Sure, sometimes it works the other way around, but, the thing is you don't necessarily need a coach. I think a lot of people think, what's the point in filming myself unless I've got a coach to critique it? You'll see stuff. We're all used to looking at footage of people climbing. We all watch climbing videos. We know what good climbers look like when they're in action.
Well, I wanted to loop back to one point that you made there about, you were speaking to it of the warm up, but I want to expand it out into harder boulders about, maybe doing it a second time. And this is something that I don't do very often. I train on a kilter board quite a bit when I'm not able to get outside. but whether I'm outside or whether I'm on the kilter board, I don't often do a very hard climb more than once. You know, it's not because like mentally I don't want to quote unquote unsend it. I don't carry around that like weird, you know, kind of aversion, if you will, that some people do. No. I just kind of tick it and then I move on to the next one. And I'm curious what your thoughts as a coach are about repeats of not just kind of perfect repeats of warm-ups, if you will, but of harder boulders, things that maybe it took me a few sessions to do.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So definitely when I was talking about it earlier, I was talking much more about like easy stuff that you're just purely looking at the movement side, and there's no like it's not like physically difficult for you. So the main reason people, of course, like you send this boulder, if it's a really hard boulder and it's something you've been trying a long time, the last thing you want to do is try and do it again. You want to move on and just, you know, like fresh challenge, fresh stimulus. So this has come into training for myself and also people that I work with quite a lot. And I think the times when I would suggest repeating a boulder would be if you're climbing on a symmetrical board. It's an incredible challenge to try and do the mirror of this boulder again.
Right.
Because in theory, you should be able to flash it. You know that you're physically capable. You've just climbed it. It's exactly the same moves. It's exactly the same holds. But you try and see what happens. You'll be lucky if you do this boulder in a session. Like, like the next session, when you're fresh, if you come back and you try the mirror, if this is a hard boulder for you, like it's going to feel hard again. And like that's an amazing like scrambling of the whole of the senses, you know, and also this kind of contradiction of something that you've done yet you haven't. Right. You know, so that's a really valuable exercise if you've got a sim board. And I also think, you know, if you've got a kilter or a tension or an adjustable angle board, it's really beneficial to tilt it and try and do it again, especially because you might get the next grade up. It might be like, let's say it's V8 at 40 degrees. It might be V9 at 45. So you might get the tick. But like sometimes, of course, the 5 degree change is dramatic and you get completely shut down. So, you know, it's a really valuable exercise to break it and go 2.5 degrees steeper, do it at 2.5 degrees steeper, and then go for another 2.5 degrees and try and do it at 5 degrees steeper. And then, like, you know, that's a real sign that you've improved, because what you're doing is you're using all the engrams and everything you've learned from doing it at one angle to give you the best possible chance of doing it at the steeper angle. Sure. It's obviously, you know, I've done this the other way around. There was a boulder I was trying the other day, a V9 on the tension board, and I looked at it. It was at 50 degrees, and that's like not my best angle. I looked at it at 50 degrees, and I was just like, maybe this was psychological, but hey, isn't it often psychological? Just like when you're looking up at this trad route that's giving you the fear, or this sport route that's giving you the fear. It actually happens to me on boards more than it does on trad routes. Like, I'm looking at this boulder at 50 degrees and I'm like, I don't think that just looks too hard for me. And forgive me, I know that's not, but I'm a human. Like, you know, I know you probably think, you know, all pro climbers are like, oh, I can do everything. It's not like that. I get psyched out by stuff. And I'm looking at this boulder at 50 degrees and I'm like, so I dropped it back to 45, did it. Then I did it at 47.5. And then I smashed it at 50, you know, and like, it's a good way, you know, so I think this is a really good way. I think this is a really good hack. So those would be, but if it was just like some boulder on the commercial boulder set that I'd worked for a bunch of sessions and did, would I do it again? No chance.
So where do you stop that kind of around flash grade in terms of repeats to try to perfect movement, if you will, as part of the warm up? Do you warm up kind of into the flash grade zone?
Yeah, to the flash grade zone, I'd say. Okay. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate that, man. That's great. Great perspective for us who do a lot of training on an indoor gym before trying to get outside, or for those who the gym is the outside. The gym is the goal. That's a great way to look at it and break it up. I do want to talk about tactics too, though. Crag tactics, probably more specifically. So this is for those who do want to get outside and are projecting. It could be a sport route, trad route, boulder, whatever the case may be. As a coach and as a climber, what are the biggest movers for you? What is most important for you, tactically speaking, to put you in the best position to perform outdoors?
Are we going to talk about project climbing here or on-site climbing?
Yeah, we can talk about both. I think actually both are quite valuable. I'm more of a project climber than an on-site climber myself, but I'm sure doing more on-sites would help me be a better projector.
Well, and again, I think you would say that we're talking more to like kind of weekend warrior type climbers on this podcast, people who don't have much time.
Right.
It naturally defaults you to project climbing, right? Because the message for improving on-siting isn't the message that we people who don't have much time want to hear, which is that you got to just do a ton of rock climbing.
Right.
That's the way to improve on-site climbing, I'm afraid. Sure, you can do as much endurance training as you want indoors, but really it's about time on the rock, and we don't have much of that. So, but with projecting, you can do all you can go and recce this route one season, go away, do your training. I try not to get back onto the conversation about training because this is a conversation about tactics, but they're so inherently linked because the approach that I prescribe with training for someone who wants to do a project is they start off with a more general approach to training. And then as the season approaches, they narrow the focus. You don't narrow the focus right. Let's say you're going to do like a 16-week training plan. You don't start the first week of training like doing replica boulder problems, which simulate the crux of this route. You just do like much more general. You become more of an all-rounder, and then you start to focus more on specific stuff as you're getting closer to the descending season. Now, the key is that there is this kind of overlapping period. It's the point when you start to taper in your training, add a little bit more recovery, and then you need to start getting out on the route. Like what you don't want to do is just like finish the training plan, leave it right till the last minute, and then when the conditions window is perfect, get out on the route because you're going to miss the window. We see people do this a lot. You've got to be getting out on this route when it's still either too cold and wet or too hot because you're on it in the kind of you're off season on the route, and it has the effect of almost like training with a weight vest. You're on this route in bad conditions. You're either getting numb fingers or there's wet holds or it's like super hot and you're sweating away, and you've got to hold your nerve during this period because this route is going to be feeling. It's not going to be giving you the feedback that you want. You're not going to be doing like big links on this route, and it's going to be feeling tough. But why that is, and you're there for a reason because then, like, if you nail it, when the window comes and the conditions are perfect, you've now got the intel, you've got this route wired, you've hit your peak in your training, and everything comes good. So it's getting the timing of all that stuff right. And of course, add the nutrition stuff to the mix that I was talking about earlier as well. So really there's like three timelines. There's the kind of weather and conditions for the Crag timeline, then there's the training timeline, and there's the nutrition timeline. And to really climb your best in projecting, you've got to get all those things synced up. But then when it actually comes to the sending season, when you're actually trying to do this route, I think getting your approach to maintenance training right is very important. Doing the right stuff during the week to enable you to maximize your performance on this route when you try it on the weekend. And usually it's a matter of being very diagnostic. It's about having this session on the route and going, what was missing? What was I lacking? What do I need a bit more of? I felt a bit weak on that hold. Oh, like, okay, so I'm going to do some half crimp dead hanging on the hangboard, to work on that. Or like maybe it was my my power endurance was just down a little bit when I was trying those links. So I'm going to do like circuits of this particular length or this particular angle or style, and being very, very prescriptive and diagnostic in your approach, but also resisting the temptation. And it's the classic temptation is thinking that you're in the middle of the sending season and you're thinking, I'll do a bunch more like really hard, fatiguing, exhausting training, and that'll give me the best chances of sending my route. No. This is the time when the quality has to be higher than ever. So you can still do like hard boulders or like, max hangs, or you can do like hard circuits, but you're going to take longer rests in between them than you would do normally in the middle of a kind of training or a work phase. And you're going to do less sets overall, less climbs. And so you're going to end up with this feeling of sharpness. You're going to feel recovered, but you're also going to feel like what you did in your midweek training sessions was very, very prescriptive and very similar to the feeling that you get on your project. And this is as much, I dare say, if not more, about boosting confidence and like like it's about creating the same climate in your training so that when you go out on the project, it doesn't feel so different. And you see, because this is the thing that defeats so many gym climbers, is that they get out on the project and the environment just feels so different. So you got to simulate that environment in your training, and better still, make it worse in training. So if this route has like bad slippery polished footholds, train on even more slippery polished footholds. Or if this route is 30 degrees like overhanging, train on 35, or like make it somehow like worse in training so that when you get out on this route, you're actually pleasantly surprised. You're like, oh, wow, this isn't so bad. And I guess it's also being brave enough to call time. Like some climbers like to set themselves, I'm going to be trying this route over a 6-week period and then that's it. And if I don't send, then okay, it's a rest. And then it's back to the drawing board with training and repeat, when the next sending season comes around. I think you need to know yourself as a climber and know how your psych works, and know that, because I've almost forgotten this now because it was such a long time ago, because I'm so happy and relaxed and like just cool about trying hard stuff and failing on hard stuff and trying it again and maybe doing it and maybe not. It's not a big deal, because I happened upon that like magical headspace, like let's say it was about 10 years ago. And it was alongside the nutrition, it was the other big change in my climbing. I stopped getting stressed. Okay. And it was just like this huge weight off my shoulders. I can now just enjoy the climbing. And when you dial into that headspace, that's when the magic happens. But I fully appreciate, for a lot of people listening to this, that project climbing can be really stressful. So you got to manage your emotions here. You got to find a strategy that works, because the classic question is, people say, do you only try the project? Do you do any other types of climbing? Now, if you want to maximize time on this project and like really like in physical terms, the more you go on this project, the more likely you are to do it. And providing you're fit and strong, other types of climbing are essentially a frivolous distraction. But if other types of climbing serve to like help you relax and chill out a bit and not get so stressed about the project, and help you to say to yourself, oh, I did a bunch of climbs on that particular day, I've actually done some stuff this year apart from just going on this project. If that serves to kind of chill you out and calm you down and make you get less stressed on the project, then do it. But like, if you feel like I do about projecting at the moment, I'm like, I might as well just, when I was trying Sabotage, I wasn't doing anything else. And when I was trying Lexicon, I wasn't doing anything else. And I didn't care, Right. So you've got to know yourself well enough to be able to like take a step back, watch yourself and say, is this starting to become an unpleasant experience? Am I just like actually dreading to go on this route? And ideally you'll nip it in the bud before you get into that headspace. You'll go, oh, I'm starting to get a little, okay, what do I need to do here? Like, go do some climbing elsewhere, whatever it might be, rather than wait until you become so, stressed out about it that basically it's kind of gone. You're not going to get that ideal headspace back.
Well, I appreciate you bringing us to this point in our conversation, because we are now entering the mental game chapter, which is such rich territory for climbers, because we're not just a pure strength sport, and there's so much of the mentality that comes in, and you bring an incredible lens to this, being a true all-rounder, including deep water solo and some sketchy winter climbing, and definitely a heady trad, as we've already established with Lexicon and others. So continuing where we're leaving off from that prior chapter there, you talked about this moment where you were able to release the stress, and I'm assuming it's kind of the stress of the send or the pressure or the expectation. And was that on a specific route or a specific moment in your life that you recall?
I think it came down to one of the biggest things, which I've mentioned already, which was having kids. I think that really helped. And this is like, again, the really positive message to parents. It's not the case of, oh, you've got kids, that's it, game over. It's like, no, actually, the paradigm shift and the change of priorities can actually bring out the best in your climbing. And that was an example of how that worked for me. It also makes you value your time so much more, and it gets you much more focused, and it gets you thinking like, I'm not just going to like mess around at the climbing gym and do a bit of this and do a bit of that. I'm going to like nail it. I'm going to like do the important stuff. So it was that, but also I think I saw the great project climbers who I really admired, people like Chris Sharma and Steve McClure, and the way those guys are at the Crag. And, you know, you'd get no idea that they're trying, like, you know, in Steve's case, like the hardest route in the UK, and in Chris's case, probably the hardest route in the world, because they're like, oh, wow, it's such a nice view. Oh, I really love being here. Oh, look at the trees today. Oh, you know, and how are you getting on with your project? Oh, you're doing so well on that. And like, so basically taking an interest in their environment, taking an interest in other people, like cracking jokes, having fun, you know, and then going up on their route and having some like all out attempt and like failing at the 20th clip or something, you know, for the flipped 100th time, and coming down and going, oh, I really enjoyed that. That was such a cool burn. Oh, I'm really looking forward to having another go. And you're just like, how does that even work? How, like, where does that come from? Like, because I did go through a point where I actually like nearly gave up project climbing because it was just starting to, you know, I was, and I think this is the thing that's helped me as a coach. I was speaking at the start of this about, you know, like how some climbers are genetically, like physically genetically gifted. Some climbers are also like psychologically gifted in the sense that they just have the right mindset. Now, I don't think I used to have that. Honestly, man, I mean, I ruined a trip to Australia in my early 20s because I was totally tunnel visioned on climbing punks in the gym. It was the hardest route in the Southern Hemisphere, this really famous route. All my peers had done it. Like, I told myself that I had to go and climb punks in the gym. And I went out there and I did quite well on it in the first few days. And then I cut a flapper. And I wasn't interested in doing any other types of climbing or risking, like, you know, like opening up this flapper. I was like resting to do punks in the gym, you know, and then of course I waited a whole week. I did no climbing, and then I went back on it and I opened the flapper up again. So I rested another week, and I was becoming like, I must have been a total pain in the backside to all the people I was with on that trip, because I was just like way too obsessed with it. And then like on the last day, there I am at the Crag. Oh, I'm not going to do it. Oh, my dream, you know, like, this is just a total nonsense, you know. So I've been that. I've been that person, you know, and I'm a completely different climber now. You know, I mean, obviously you can't continue with that type of intensity. You know, the bubble's got to burst, and for me it did. I went away and just I changed the. You know, after that Australia trip, I was like just going away on like really fun exploratory type trips, like, you know, going to new places, like developing new routes. Didn't matter whether they were hard or easy. It was more about exploration, cultural experiences, and so on. And I just, you know, I had a bit of a reset, and then I just came back to it with this change of perspective.
But then to do something truly hard, to do something that's truly at the limit, whatever that limit is for you, you do have to want it, right? You do have to really want it and care. And you look at Adam Ondra, who maybe almost flashes something really hard and he doesn't, and he's kicking off the wall and screaming because he wants it. It's because he cares. And so there is a little bit of a kind of an interplay between not letting it be toxic, but also not being so kind of casual and relaxed and laissez-faire that then you just don't ever go after anything that's hard.
Yeah, that's the contradiction, isn't it? And, you know, look, in Adam's case, you know, I think it's just that, you know, it's like that, all that's because I've, you know, I was obviously, I've climbed with him, and in particular was with him when he flashed my route lexicon. Yeah, but because incredible. But there was still this like incredible outburst from him when he got to the top. But he was successful, but there was still, what you see in Adam is it's just winding up like this, and it's building up and it's building up and it's building up. It's this huge force, and it catapults him up the wall like this. You can just see he's just going on this like wall of Psych, and he gets to the top. And in that case, he was just like, you know, almost like a kid who'd drunk too much Pepsi Cola, and he was like, oh, you know, like, and it was all just coming out like that. You know, it just comes pouring out of him. I mean, that's Adam's personality. And of course, if he doesn't manage it, it's going to have more of an angry tone to it. Yeah, he gets pissed off with himself when he falls off, but he's not this kind of smoldering, like negative energy type guy, obviously, at all. And this is what we're talking about here is difficult to define. But for me, undoubtedly, it's this ultimate contradiction. It's like you want it, more than anything. You want it so badly, and yet you have to not want it. And so mustn't muddy the waters here, because Tim, when he was doing Ayurveda, like principally was looking to Hazel for like for sort of psychological coaching, but equally because I was doing his physical training, I was talking to Tim a lot while he was on Ayurveda and WhatsApp messaging him all the time. And I was telling him, look, I was like, you have to not want it. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but you've got to treat this just like you're training, like you're just training on the Crag. And of course he couldn't. And I could see that he couldn't. And we then went into the last, like it was the night before the last day. And I remember saying to my wife, I was like, I need to send Tim a message to almost like prepare him for what's going to happen when he wakes up in the morning. But I don't want to trigger that by sending him that message, because it might not happen. He might be all right. But I knew he was about to have the biggest meltdown of his climbing career. I could see it was coming. And I was genuinely worried for him. And sure enough, he had a massive meltdown the next morning. Massive. It was hardcore. And I mean, I'm sure Hazel was saying some stuff to him, but I was saying some stuff to him as well. And I was like, this is the best thing that could possibly have happened. You needed to have this meltdown because you've let go, you've given up. So now just go out and climb the effing thing. Okay? And he did.
Hell yeah, dude. I remember him so clearly, so vividly, him recounting this moment that happened, because it did seem like it was quite cathartic once it was over, but an incredibly hard and challenging thing that had been simmering and building, and the pressure was building. And he did mention that you had crafted a message to send to him, but then you didn't want to be the one to tip him off on it, but then he tipped off on it.
Right.
So then you had that conversation.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So you knew it was coming. How did you know it was coming?
Oh, because it was inevitable, because I've been in that exact position before, but on routes that have taken me a season as opposed to 8 years. And I've had that exact meltdown in Spain, on the last day of my trip, trying my 8C and all this sort of stuff. But like, Tim is a very positive, cup half full, great energy type of guy, as we all know, but he's not a flipping robot. He is a human, and there was no escaping that. He had to totally lose his shit, at that precise moment on the curve. And sure enough, he totally lost it, but it was great, because that was what he needed to do. And you can't do this route with it all bottled up. When the dam is like full to bursting, the dam has to burst. You've got to take the lid off the pressure cooker and let it blow and reset and then go. And I think that I've just developed this way of, just letting the pressure just blow off along the way so it doesn't build.
That's what it sounds like. You've come to a point in your life and your climbing career where you're able to do that. You're more in touch with it, so it doesn't need to be this one big eruption cathartic event, but it can just, to your point, you're kind of on the pressure cooker. There's that little button on the top, and you're just able to kind of release the pressure as you go, so it never goes over. Now, are there certain techniques that you use for that you've just found work for yourself in order to be in touch with those emotions?
I think initially it was more just like modeling my behaviors on those climbers who I admired. I mean, I mentioned Chris, I mentioned Steve, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to just start like trying to behave more like them when I'm at the Crag. I look, don't get me wrong. I'm sure I'm someone who, I'm not just this guy. I've never been just this guy at the Crag who's only thinking about myself. Sure, I'm like always chatting to people and all this, but I was really like, something else that played into this was what I've noticed in coaching. This has been one of the great tools where coaching has paid me back, because it takes the pressure off my own climbing, because I'm taking an interest in others. So I know that this works. So I just said to myself, make sure I do this at the Crag. Like, just think more about what other people are doing. Ask them how their send's going. Like, ask them what their strategy is going to be. Like, just really think about others. I think that's really important. And keep smiling, keep lighthearted. Just even if you're not feeling it, do it. And then maybe you'll start to feel it. And I think that was the way. Just be like Steve.
Yeah.
Be like Steve or be like Chris, don't overthink this. And sometimes I think when you're going to make changes to your psychology, like, you have to just initially do things and they're not actually working and you're not actually feeling them at the time. But if you keep repeating them, then they become ingrained behaviors and then they start to work, So there was probably a bit of that going on. I won't say it was quite that deliberate, but it was more just a case of, don't be like that stress guy over there, be like that chill guy over there.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I mean, just be the person that you want to hang out with when you're at the Crag, I think is pretty good advice. Well, I have one more question for you on this kind of mental game chapter here before we move on to some closing moments. And this has just been such a delight. I can't wait to chat with you more. The last thing that I want to bring up here is something that I've heard you say in the past. And that's, I just jotted it down as a direct quote. You said, people don't realize how hard they can climb. And you've worked with so many climbers now, from the elite to the weekend warrior. What do you mean by that? What have you discovered?
Well, I keep coming back to the fact that I was one of those people too. And I think that certain negative stereotypes can have really damaging effects on people's psyche and self-belief. My one was like my time I spent in Sheffield, when I was like this really like impressionable age, from the age of like 18 to 25, and I was surrounded there were stronger climbers who just kind of gave me this feeling that I was never going to be able to do the stuff that they were doing. Like, an 8C was like this kind of pinnacle grade that I'm thinking like, well, these guys are finding 8C hard and they're like 3 or 4 boulder grades stronger than me on the board. What's the point me even trying 8C? Not seeing that it takes more than just strength to climb a hard route. It takes skill, it takes tactics, it takes mental control, it takes, but just saying, well, they're much better than me. They weren't necessarily better. They were stronger, but like in Sheffield at that time, stronger meant better. And if they're that much better.
This is Ben Moon, Jerry Moffat, the clan.
Those guys, and they're so much stronger than me. And I'm thinking, well, if they're finding those grades hard, there's almost no point me even trying them. So you just defeat yourself at that point. And I think that people can have like a bad experience on a grade and just think that like all routes of that grade are going to be like that without realizing that they got on a route that was anti-style, or they got on it at the wrong point in their climbing year, or it was conditions, or they weren't at the right point in their training, or like all these factors can play in. And it's like, because climbing is such a sort of like a nuanced thing. All right, okay, put it like this. As I've probably made pretty clear, bouldering is my kind of the thing I struggle with the most, as much mentally as physically. I went out the other day and there was a boulder that I'm really keen to do. I did it in 2 halves and I was like, oh, wow, I'm doing all right on this. Training's working. This is cool. It's a little bit warm. Well, I just need to come back on a slightly cooler day and I'm going to send this. So like 3 days later, I came back. It was a cooler day and I was like, right, okay, here we go. Send train. And I couldn't do a single move on it.
Wow.
Not one. And it was because, like, reflecting, it was a conditions thing. And I'd thought, with my knowledge of conditions, which I'd say I've got some experience when it comes to outdoor climbing conditions, but most of the crags I climb on, when it's cooler, you do a bit better. But what happened was my skin had just become really like thick and it was just glassing off the holds. And even my feet were popping, like the rubber that felt harder on the holds, and the holds just felt dead glassy and my feet were just popping off. And it was like, of course, initially I was like spitting a dummy and blaming myself. But I honestly like walked away and reflected and I was like, how did that boulder go from within the space of 3 days, going from feeling pretty all right and doable to feeling totally impossible? Now, had those days been the other way round, had I had the second day first, I wouldn't have gone back to that boulder. I'd have said to myself, in spite of doing all this training indoors and feeling really strong and doing that grade on the tension board, I've done, 6 boulders of this grade on the tension board in the last couple of weeks. But then if I'd had that second day when I went out and I couldn't do a single move, I'd go away feeling totally crestfallen with my tail between my legs saying, I'm not going to give that another try, not realizing that it just needed to be 5 degrees warmer. I'll go back and smash it out, So that's what climbing's like. And all these experiences can add, like if you're not experienced and you don't have the ability to take a step back and see what it was, you just take the message, oh, I wasn't good enough.
Man, that is such a great story. Thank you for sharing that, because I do think I deal with this with my kids often, but who are we but just big kids? We're all humans, which is the importance of having a bit of an early win and creating a bit of momentum. And then that gives you confidence that you say, I can do this. Getting back to your quote here, people don't realize how hard they can climb. You just need that belief, I think. And that belief is the biggest performance enhancing drug or piece of aid you could ever put in there. And to your point, if it had been the reverse, you wouldn't have had the belief. You would have just said, it's not for me. I'm not ready. It's not the right project. So how incredible to discover that and be aware of that. And I think for those of us, if you do go out and you get on something that you're excited about and you get absolutely smacked down by it, maybe wait a week and go back and try it again in slightly different conditions or with more sleep the night before. Just try not to judge a project by one attempt, I guess.
Totally true. And I'm going to let you into a bit of a secret here. For over a decade, I used to run coaching holidays in the Easter time, it would be in Fontainebleau. And then in the autumn, we'd go to Kalymnos, and I'd have a group, myself and my colleague, Steve Golly, who I was coaching with. We'd have a group of like 8 to 10 people, and we'd take them out sport climbing. And they were like your classic intermediate climbers, climbing generally between like French 6B and French 7A. And the clinics that we ran, the workshops were very structured. We'd have a little section on footwork, we'd have a little section on on-site technique, stuff on clipping, stuff, blah, blah, blah. We'd go through all the kind of hard skills, if you like. But here's the rub, like that stuff was all well and good. When the magic happened was just we'd have a Redpoint project day. And in fact, this happened on on-siting day as well. But in particular, it happened on the Redpoint project day. We would just go, I would take this person on one side and Steve would do the same. And I'd go, hey, you know what? I've seen you climbing for the last 3 days and I've picked this route. It's going to be ideal for you. I know you can do it. It's that one. And they'd look in the guidebook and they'd go, but that's 7A. The hardest I've climbed is 6B plus or 6C. Like, why are you telling me I can do that? I've just got this feeling. I've seen you climb. I know this route. I know you can do it. And they do it.
Amazing.
That's how it works.
That's
just how it works. And like people, we had this guy, I hope he's listening to this, David Sant. He came to Kalymnos. His hardest red point was 6B plus, and he did a 7B plus.
Oh my gosh. He jumped a
and he was like actually seriously cursing me because like we got him on this route early in the trip and he was still like failing on it on the last day. And he was like joking, but saying, I think I want my money back. I've done hardly any climbing and you've put me on a route that's like a zillion grades harder than like, what kind of like crap coaching is this,
Right.
And anyway, he I was actually, must say, I was starting to panic and think maybe I've pushed this a little bit too far, but I just knew. And this route was not soft touch. It was a confirmed, he did this route called Spartacus in Kalymnos, which is still given 7B plus. And it used to be given 7C. And he sent this route like when the sun was setting on the last day of the trip. It was amazing, but it was
epic.
It was like, he came out on that trip saying he was going to be happy to climb like a 6C plus or something like that, maybe a 7A, and he did a 7B plus.
That's incredible.
People set the bar way low on themselves as a result of a whole range of factors. That's the reason I say this, is because I've just seen it time and again. And yeah, look, I would love to say to you, oh, it was because of the hard skills, because of the nuances of the coaching, the stuff that we said about movement, the stuff that we said about pace, the stuff that we said about resting on the wall, the stuff that, like, I'm sure that stuff helped. But I know, because it happened so many times, that it was just that little kind of trick that we do, this little hushed, that route for you, that's your route, And it's almost like sort of Neil thinks I can do it, so therefore I will, because it's just taking their own, like they're not responsible for it. Someone else who they trust has said that they can do it, and sure enough.
Totally. I mean, the little inner critic that we all have, that negative voice there, adds a physical weight to our bodies when we're climbing. And sometimes all it takes is the person that you're with, your belayer, or certainly somebody who is a better climber, a stronger climber, an authority figure like yourself to say, I've seen you, I know you can do this. And I mean, for those listening, by the way, that was a huge jump for David that Neil was talking about there. I mean, that's like 511A to 512C. That's just an absolutely monstrous jump to do. But, you know, I had a very similar experience myself on this recently with this boulder project that I took on, where it was like a wildly high goal. It was 4 grades harder than I had ever bouldered outside. And from V4 to V8, I took on a V8 project, and the outcome was far from certain. And I did it, in less time than I ever would have imagined. But I put that goal out there, a bold goal, and I just said, okay, I'm getting after this thing. And on the day that I sent it, which was just a few days ago, I haven't even talked about it yet on the podcast.
Hey, congrats, man! That's so cool.
Oh, thank you. It's incredible. I mean, it was just such an incredible journey. But I was out there and I had gone ground to the lip multiple times. And on this day, that was perfect conditions, and I should have just like floated it. The expectation was there or whatever. And I just kept popping off at weird moves that I never had dropped or I hadn't dropped in a long time. And I started getting in my head and thinking like, well, maybe I'm not ready, or maybe I'm not recovered. And my buddy pulled me aside and he said, hey, you are very, very ready for this. Like, he goes, you're strong enough to do this, dude. Like, I'm seeing you on all these moves. You're strong enough to do it. You're just like, it's going to happen. You know, you're going to do it. You're just going to do it. So don't worry about doing it. Don't, you know, you're like trying to go fast and you're over gripping and all that. Like, just like, I know you can do this. And he's a much stronger climber than me. He's like, I'm watching you and I know you can do this. And I just kind of, that belief like took me over to the crash pad and then straight up to the top of the thing. And so, yeah, it really does make a difference. If we don't believe we can do it ourselves in the moment, to have somebody else say, I believe, it can give you a little bit of that extra boost. I really appreciate you sharing that story.
There has to be that belief. And you know, I'm not going to say I invented this. I mean, like almost everything I've done in my coaching, it's a result of an experience that I've had that I've just basically passed on. And when I was trying my first 8B plus, it's a route called Mecca at Raventor. And I'd said to myself that I was not going to go double figures in terms of number of days on this route. I was going to do like 9 days and then I was going to call it. I wasn't going to go to 10 days because that's just like too much time. So of course I'm on my 9th day, aren't I? And this is back in that, you know, when I was in my early 20s, when I was getting super stressed about Redpoint projects. And I Redpoint up into the crux, get through the crux, fall off the next move, and I lower down. And this guy called Mark Leach, who was like one of my childhood heroes, who actually did the first descent of the extension of this route, like the 8C extension. And he was like this sort of superstar from the 80s. And he said to me, like, no way. He was like, I don't quite understand why you fell off. You look stronger on every single move up to that point than I was when I did it. He goes, you should just get on with it and do it. And so I did, I did it next go. And it was just, again, just having that person who I respected and trusted telling me that I looked the part. It was just so powerful. But I also think I'm really picking up on what you just said about this boulder that you've just sent. All the time you didn't quite believe in yourself. You were trying to climb it this way or trying to climb it that way. Maybe you were gripping on a bit too hard. Maybe one go you did it too quick, so you slowed it down. Maybe you try. This was Tim's obsession with Ereveya, and he was doing it on social media. And I told him to stop. I was like, stop asking people, whether they think that you should do the bottom bit quicker or whether you should spend longer on that rest or whether you should do this or whether you should do that. I was like, just detach, because it's another one of those contradictions like we talked about earlier. It's like, you have to analyze, you have to do the whole marginal gains thing. You have to look at everything and then you have to throw it away. Like, I mean it. You have to throw it away and you have to just climb. It's the Nike cliche, you have to just do it. And I kept saying to Tim, don't overthink this, man. Climb and let the Redpoint magic happen. What happens is, the more time you spend on this route, your body just gets programmed at such a refined, subtle level that you don't feel it happening, and you just dial into it better, and you dial into it better, and you dial into it better, and it happens automatically. And sometimes thinking can mess this process up. It's like, just let it take its course, just let it happen, and it does. And then you climb this thing and you're just like, wow, why then? Why did it happen? It just happened. That's the feeling you're looking for.
God, such a good feeling, Neil. Oh, dude, I'm so
Yeah,
psyched.
we love it.
Thank you.
We're addicted. We love it.
Oh, we so are, man. What a great note to wrap up this incredibly insightful and stoked conversation, man. I'm so grateful for your time. If people want to work with you, how do they do so?
Okay, so my website is neilgreshamtraining.com. Principally, I offer super duper personalized plans. And we probably haven't got time to talk about this, but anyone who's offering training plans at the moment, probably your biggest competitor is AI. And AI is actually producing some surprisingly decent training plans. They're not always consistent. You've got to read the small print. Sometimes you see something like kind of crazy in the small print, but you see pretty decent plans. But when I personalize plans, I go to the real level of actually setting load levels for all the exercises. I use the metrics to tell people exactly what edges they use on the hangboard, how much weight they need to use for each set of each exercise. Same with lifting training, lift X number of pounds for this. And same with grades, like every boulder, this first set is V2, the next set is V4. It's like, because I don't think, AI can't do that yet. So that's what I do. And it's all via questionnaire. But as I said earlier, if you want to chat to me, we can do WhatsApp calls as well. Yeah, it's just at neilgreshamtraining.com. And predominantly these days, I like to work with intermediates. A lot, elites are great, but they're kind of good anyway, and they're so knowledgeable, and you're making micro differences. And of course, the whole Tim thing was magical, but really, I enjoy helping people get from breaking the barrier of 7A or even breaking the barrier of 8A, that sort of thing, and working with just normal people with normal lives, normal jobs. So yeah, it's at neilgreshamtraining.com.
Well, I'll put those links to make it easy for you all. I'll put those links down in the show notes there. And as you know from listening to Dusty's Weekend Warrior episode, Neil is incredibly intentional and personal with how he works with his clients. So Neil, thank you so much, man. I'm just
thank you, Ryan.
Absolutely off my rocker energized after this conversation. It's just been such a joy and a pleasure, man. I'm grateful for your time.
It's been fantastic to talk to you. And it's just so nice to really take the boxing gloves off and go in deep. They're always the best discussions, aren't they?
Oh, man, I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Neil, thank you for bringing the goods. 2 hours. 2 hours is long for the Struggle Climbing Show, but man, I could not cut this down any further than I did. I mean, it just, every section slapped. And for you who are listening right now, just listen again. Just end this and start over and listen to it all again, because there is absolute gold to be mined in every single one of those chapters. I just learned so much. And by the way, you can learn even more and get even more hyped with some really actionable takeaways in our bonus episode with Neil for Patreon supporters and Apple subscribers. In it, Neil breaks down why training alone won't take you all the way. And so he focuses a little bit more on some skill, mindset, and self-awareness things to unlock our highest potential. He shares some time-efficient protocols for busy climbers. Hello, busy climbers, paging busy climbers, including new parents, and why consistency matters a lot more than the quote-unquote perfect plan. And then he shares a really sneaky en-route resting trick, like a grip trick that he uses that can instantly improve your endurance, something that I actually tried out when I was climbing yesterday. I'll tell you more about that in a second. And the last thing we cover in this banger bonus episode, it's like 30 minutes with Neil, is a really powerful perspective on aging in climbing and why your best days are probably still ahead of you. Hell yes to that. I loved it. You can listen to it right now for free with a free trial over at Patreon. So thestruggleclimbingshow.com/Patreon. Or if you're an Apple person, you can just double click right there and get your free trial to access over 150 hours of bonus content that I got going on here over at The Struggle. It's just like masterclass after masterclass. It's pretty crazy. I think the value is really good. And if you don't like it, you can just quit. No worries, no expectation. But yeah, I encourage you to go listen to that bonus episode with Neil. He just continues to bring the goods. Speaking of my climbing and Neil's sneaky resting trick, I tried it out yesterday. I went climbing with Eric Hurst, another legendary coach who's been at it for decades. I got to get out with Eric for the first time this year, and we tied in and got on some routes, and I got absolutely spanked. I'll tell you what, Neil's secret resting trick helped me for about the first 4 bolts, and then the next 6 bolts, I was just absolutely dying. It was pretty hot, but man, it was so fun. It's always just fun to get out and not really have any high expectations. So I'll kind of dive into all of that. I'm going to have a plog coming out soon. That's another thing that's available to Patreon members. Even free members get access to the plog, my monthly training updates. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because I also just completed a full strength assessment. So I did max hangs on a 20 millimeter edge. I did max edge lifts using my Forceboard force gauge, and I did 2 rep max weighted pull-ups. And spoiler alert, I PR'd everything. It's the best numbers I've ever had. Obviously I came off like a real focused strength block trying to do the hardest boulder of my life, which I did. And really the only metric that matters is that I sent Bulldog, but I was curious where my fingers and arms and lockoffs and all of that were on the tail end of all of this training that I've been doing. And I was pretty happy, guys, pretty happy. So I'll talk through all of those metrics and specifics and what it means and maybe doesn't mean in the plog. But did it translate to rock? Well, the answer is yes for the first few bolts. Everything feels really easy on routes right now until the dreaded, beautiful, wonderful, delicious Red River Gorge pump sets in on the forearms. And man, I was bricked. So yeah, it's time for me to focus on endurance training and to take all this strength and now put it to use on rock with a little bit more fitness. So I am going to be going down a deep endurance rabbit hole here for the next few months. I'll talk more about those specifics on the plog, but I'll also be doing a bunch of episodes coming up here focusing on endurance training, both for boulderers, route climbers, indoor climbers, and outdoor climbers. The more capacity we have, the more we can get high quality reps inside and out, which just will make us better climbers. So that'll be not an exclusive theme, but a bit of a through line, if you will, over the coming months as I am trying to build up fitness to do some really, really hard, steep sport routes that I'm really excited about. Okay, more on that later. I want to shout out the sponsors of the Struggle Climbing Show. If you want some deals, don't pay full price for anything, you guys. Check the show notes of this for some fantastic discounts on really, really great products and gear that I personally use all the time. Very grateful for the support of the sponsors of the Struggle Climbing Show, and to Glenn, Philippa, and Haley for helping me to make this show week after week. To the incredible Patreon supporters that help me keep the lights on here in the podcast/utility closet. And I want to shout out the hero level supporters. That's Aiden, Michael, and Kent. Y'all are amazing. Thank you so much for your very generous support month over month so that I can keep making this show. And just to all of you for listening. I really appreciate it. I got some new stuff up on the new YouTube channel, which is at Ryan Devlin Climbing. Lots of stuff happening over on Instagram. If you want to get in touch with me, you know where to find me. I hope you're just having an awesome week, really getting after it, being intentional and thoughtful and grateful with your training and your climbing. And I will see you very soon.